reading the collected poems of Li sang a journey to find oneself in a complex world. The world we live in is often complex and difficult to understand. News media is flooded with events that seem incomprehensible, and the hearts of those around us are equally hard to fathom. With only the knowledge we've learned in school and the experiences we've gathered in society, it's not easy to clearly explain everything. Sometimes we feel confused and lost, unable to find answers to fundamental questions like, why is the world like this? Who am I, and what is the truth? Amid these questions and confusion, we often seek comfort and insight through books. But many people shake their heads at the word book. Especially for poetry, this reaction is even stronger. Many believe that poetry is difficult, reserved for the refined, and far removed from their own lives. Others may even avoid opening poetry collections due to unpleasant memories of having to memorize forced poetic lines during literature classes. Today, I'd like to introduce a special collection of poems that shatters these prejudices and difficulties all at once: Li Sang's complete poems. Li Sang is one of the most innovative and unique poets in Korean literary history. His poetry is simultaneously described as difficult, strange, and shocking. Perhaps for those lacking knowledge or cultural background, it might seem even more challenging to approach. Still, I boldly assert that this book can become an unexpected companion, offering surprising insight and freedom to anyone struggling to find meaning or seeking to understand themselves in this complicated world. Li Sang, the solitary genius ahead of his time. To understand Li Sang's poetry, we first need to briefly learn about the time in which he lived and his personal history. Li Sang was a tragic genius who was born in around 1910 in Seoul, then known as Gyeongseong, and died at the young age of 27. His life overlapped with the dark era of Japanese colonial rule, a time when Korean identity was under threat and traditional values were confused by Western influence. Li Sang was an elite student who graduated from the architecture department at Gyeongseong Industrial High School and worked as an architect. At first glance, this background seems far removed from a poet's career, but recurring elements in his poetry, geometric forms, architectural-like arrangements, and the use of numbers, clearly reflect his field of study. As an artist, he lived an unconventional life marked by illness, poverty, and defiance of established norms. His poems are both painful confessions born from the chaos of his era and unstable personal life, and records of desperate attempts to transcend it all. What makes Li Sang's complete poems so strange? Now, let's delve into the content of Li Sang's complete poems. Once you open this collection, you may be surprised and confused by how different it appears from the typical poetry you've encountered. 1. Revolutionary format and language play. Li Sang's poetry does not resemble the poetry we usually expect. Instead of neatly aligned stanzas and beautiful metaphors and symbols, his poetry often looks like random doodles on paper or mathematical formulas and architectural diagrams. He ignores spacing rules, uses punctuation in radical ways, and even mixes foreign languages and Hanja, Chinese characters. For instance, in one of his famous works, 5 Senses, the first page begins with the title number 1 and repeatedly states, 13 children race down the street, before suddenly shifting to, terrifying children, confusing readers. This unconventional approach completely shatters our fixed notions of what poetry should be. 2. Sharp questions hidden in complexity. The most notable feature of Li Sang's poetry is its difficulty. Even after reading the poems, you might not understand what they mean. They feel surreal and disconnected from logical flow, like scenes from a dream. Yet, it is precisely this complexity that holds Li Sang's true insights. He continuously questions and deconstructs the logic of the world we take for granted, the order of language, and the identity of the self. The deconstruction of self in the poem Mirror, the speaker stares at his reflection and finds it unfamiliar, especially the mirrored left-hand self. He even curses this mirrored eye, showing how fragile and easily broken our belief in a complete self is. Is the eye in the mirror the true eye? Or is only the eye outside the mirror real? Through these questions, Li Sang makes us reconsider how fragile our belief in being a unified, whole self really is. Alienation from the world and a sense of disconnection. Lee Sang's poetry reveals the deep sense of alienation and helplessness that intellectuals experienced during the oppressive Japanese colonial era. The world is irrational, and the individual feels like a foreigner who cannot claim any place within it. These feelings can resonate with many people today who experience alienation and confusion in modern society. Resistance to established norms. Lee Sang did not simply rebel against traditional literary forms but also challenged the rigid thinking of his time. His poetry avoids popular themes such as exemplary humanity or beautiful lives. Instead, he unflinchingly portrays his own dirty, anxious, and chaotic inner world, shouting, "This is reality and I." Insights and freedom offered by Lee Sang's complete poems. Implications. Why should people without substantial knowledge or cultural background read such a difficult and unique collection like Lee Sang's complete poems? What meaning can this book bring to us? 1. Freedom from the compulsion to understand. The greatest benefit of reading Lee Sang's poetry is the sense of liberation that comes from realizing it's okay not to understand. We live under constant pressure to learn, understand, and find answers. This is true in both school and society. However, Lee Sang's poetry offers a new experience that transcends this need for understanding. His poems cannot be fully grasped through logic or knowledge alone. Instead, they come through visual imagery, the sound of words, and indistinct waves of emotion. At first, his poetry might seem strange or even unpleasant. But these moments of "what is this?" or "that's strange" mark the beginning of stepping out of rigid thinking. You do not need to exhaustively explain every word. Simply let yourself immerse in the unusual atmosphere, unexpected combinations of words, and rhythm of repeated lines. Like appreciating abstract art or a complex piece of music, focus entirely on the feeling. Recognizing that complete understanding isn't necessary can be a great comfort and source of courage. 2. Cultivating a new perspective to see the world. Lee Sang dares to question everything we take for granted. What is normal? What is abnormal? Is the boundary between truth and falsehood really clear? His poetry expands our thinking by asking these very questions. Reading his work allows us to move beyond the world's monotonous standards and practice seeing things from diverse perspectives. For instance, the line 13 children race down the street from 5 senses initially appears confusing. Yet, it might symbolize our lives in modern society, everyone running forward yet uncertain of the destination, full of anxiety. Lee Sang already sensed this anxiety and confusion in the 1930s. His poetry reflects our unspoken inner fears, frustrations with the world, and inexplicable fears, like a mirror. 3. Courage to accept our strangeness. Society often imposes expectations on us to live a normal life, attending good schools, working at great jobs, building stable families, and living similarly to others. However, each of us carries our own strangeness, unspoken worries, misunderstood preferences, and even emotions we ourselves can't fully grasp. Lee Sang's poetry seems to whisper that we should accept and embrace this strangeness within ourselves. He unapologetically reveals his own anxiety, contradictions, and painful inner self. Reading his poetry brings comfort, realizing that we are not alone in our strange thoughts and that our confusion can still hold meaning. Rather, we may find our own unique value and beauty through this strangeness. 4. Experiences that transcend the limits of language and thought. We think and understand the world through language, yet language can also limit our thinking. Lee Sang shattered the boundaries of language and explored the possibilities of new meaning. His poetry moves beyond merely conveying logical meaning, offering intuitive and sensory experiences via the materiality of language, visual arrangements, and repetition of sounds. These experiences help us realize that there are areas beyond words and that these areas can sometimes be closer to the truth. When faced with complex problems, instead of relying solely on logic, we can learn to open up to intuition and sensation and cultivate a flexible thinking style that encourages new approaches. How to read Lee Sang's complete poems: a carefree and enjoyable approach. Reading Lee Sang's complete poems does not require special knowledge or cultural background. In fact, approaching it with an open and unbiased mind is more important. Don't try to read from beginning to end. There is no need to read every poem in order. Flip open the book randomly and choose a poem that catches your eye. With poems ranging from short to long, you can simply pick those that appeal to you. Read it aloud. The sound and rhythm of Lee Sang's poems are significant. It doesn't matter if you don't understand the meaning. By reading aloud the repeated lines or unique pronunciations, you can feel the rhythm and immerse yourself in the atmosphere the poetry offers. Appreciate it like art or music. Receive the poetry in a sensory way, like art or music. Focus on the images that arise, the moods you feel, and the strange emotions stirring within. Ask questions to yourself. Ask, why does this poem look like this? Why is this word here? What is this poet trying to tell me? Don't focus on finding answers. Value the act of questioning itself. Don't give up. If you read just one or two poems and think, this is too hard, don't lose heart. Sometimes, a poem might resonate with you immediately, other times, you need to read it several times to gradually grasp its essence. Feel free to skip parts that are hard to understand and focus only on the poems that move you. In closing, courage to find your own path, a gift left by Lee Sang. Lee Sang's complete poems is not merely a collection of old poetry. It acts as a mirror that breaks our fixed notions, helps us see the world anew, and gives us the courage to embrace even the complex and chaotic parts of ourselves. Knowledge and culture do not stem merely from knowing much. They arise from the effort to understand the world, the empathy to understand others, and the courage to surpass our own limitations. Reading Lee Sang's complete poems will be a novel journey that broadens that very knowledge and culture. In this first step into the strange yet fascinating world of the poet, you might experience a rare intellectual stimulation and freedom that you have never felt before. Don't strive for answers. Instead, enjoy the joy of wandering through the unknown space Lee Sang has opened up for you. Within this wandering, you will discover an unseen new you and gain unexpected courage and insight to chart your own path in this complicated world. Lee Sang's complete poems will become one of the most special challenges and beautiful gifts to ever appear in your life.